Manifesto is the latest film by Hjort Guttu, an artist, curator, and teacher based in Oslo. Her films Untitled, A City at Night, Time Passes, and This Time is Every Place have been presented at previous editions of our festival. She is professor at Oslo National Academy of Arts. Manifesto has its international premiere at IFFR. Maider Fortune is an artist, filmmaker, and teacher based in France. Communicating Vessels, a film she co-created with Annie McDonnell, received an Amoto Tiger Short Award in 2020. Like Manifesto, the film is partially inspired by her experiences teaching in art academies.
My first question is maybe a bit more concerning the teacher position. So Manifesto takes place in a Swedish art school, but actually referred to a wider context, which is the one of other European art schools, since the Bologna agreements. So under the pretext of harmonizing European higher education, the schools have been imposed a merger in the university model and the widespread adoption of a logic of partnership, evaluation, and profitability. Student artists were turned into artist researchers, school principals into manager and building, like in your film Manifesto, into architecture, which mimic those of multinational art foundations. This happened very quickly, barely 10 years, which deeply undermined the character of cultural exception that the art school constitutes. In this rather depressing context, the general feeling of all of us is the one of an impasse. Manifesto, on the contrary, is betting on a reconquest of agency. It abandons the position of a sole critical observation to take the side of a utopian elaboration. So I was wondering how this specific position, quite unusual position, and the making of the film is connected to your experience and practice as a teacher, and how, and if and how it relates to the utopian dimension of radical pedagogy. That's big, long questions.
Yeah, no, but interesting to hear it. Just to correct it, it's actually a Norwegian art school, and they speak mostly Norwegian in the film, but also Danish, and as you remarked, also in another question, other languages.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, I have been teaching almost since I graduated myself as a student, so I'm very familiar with teaching in art schools, and I have, of course, also observed these incredible changes that happened, the last 30, 20 years with the Bologna process, as well as a kind of national, at least in Scandinavia. I have noticed the complete makeover, in a way, of these institutions, both architecturally, which is a very important feature of this film, that their school is located in this completely alien architecture somehow, but also structurally and also digitally, that students are surveilled in a completely different manner than we used to be. So I mean, all my experiences as a teacher comes forward somehow in this film, and actually I feel that most not only art schools, I mean also I think in academia, people somehow navigate a little bit like they do in this secret school that I portray in Manifesto. I mean, it's exaggerated, of course, because they have this completely different school in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But I still feel that the art school is somehow a school in a school. It's like we're working on something which is, as you call it, utopian, or like we have this kind of vision or ideal, which is utopian in its essence, right? Because I feel that when we teach art, we always somehow try to stretch out for something which is, I don't know, higher or difficult to grasp, but that has nothing to do with, marketability or adaptation to any kind of capitalist system. So I feel that we're, in one sense, we're doing this all the time. You know, I also feel that we have this habit of complaining, you know, that everyone sees that it's not the way it should be, and we realize that more and more, and we complain a lot about it, and also students complain. And I just felt that it felt very nice and positive somehow to just create this other school where people have agency and where they really grasp all opportunities and work together and have this community. So even if it's a fiction and not a documentary, I still think it was really energizing somehow to stage it.
That's the feeling that I have when I watch it anyway. So that's a very good feeling and positive one. So my second question is on some kind of so I know a bit of your film, not all your film, but the film I saw of you were more concentrated and focused on individual struggles. So like the one just before in the art school, Time Passes, is also this one student confronted to the institutions. And so there is this, one person versus different type of institution. And here, the choral words of the protagonist and the plural writing of the manifesto place the film on the side of the collective. So I just would like to hear you on this kind of shift of perspective in a way.
Yes, thank you for noticing it, actually, because I didn't really, I mean, you're completely right. And I made all these films like over a 10-year period, I think, about this single individual struggling inside different kind of structures. It could be school, primary school, or architecture, or just their environment somehow. And suddenly I had this this idea or this vision of a community, people doing things together. I don't know if there are personal reasons for that or why suddenly that change happened, but I feel that at least in a school, I think this community is so important. I think it's almost the most important thing for students is that they have their peers, they have other students, and they have their friends in school. And they, I think they learn mostly from their peers. I mean, where I teach, we have these two main formats of teaching. We have like the individual tutorials, like me and the students in a space in the studio. But then we also have the group crit, where the whole group is somehow working on some student's project or critiquing or just commenting or helping out. And I just feel that that format is so valuable for them, even or much more actually than the kind of traditional tutorial. So maybe I just felt the impact of someone doing things together, and I felt that it was nice to focus on that. And I also feel like a great part of the film is about socializing, actually, about how people are longing for community and longing for being together. And it has been a nice experience now to show it to the people who took part in it, and also, you know, now during the COVID-19 time, because people feel really moved somehow, especially by this last scene in the film where they have this party or this gathering in this kitchen. And I think people just nowadays long so much for a kind of community and for just a normal get together and having beers and just talking and listening to music, you know. So that was, even if it has been hard to show it now because it's impossible to show it, you know, it's still the people who see it at least have this feeling. So maybe I also felt that it was nice to, or it was important to focus on the collective.
Yeah, what is funny is that in French, I don't know how it's working in other languages, but in French, the word manifeste has two meanings. So as a noun, it's denote the writing of the text, the manifesto. But as an adjective, it also characterizes what is obvious and visible and ostensible. So it's a two meaning in one word. And I find it interesting because it's really one thing and the opposite, in the case of your film. And so in your film, the glass architecture is building on this visibility. It's the whole aim of this architecture is about staging an image of the creative gesture, which is, because of glass, accessible to everyone's eyes. And in this injunction, toward this injunction, the protagonist resistance respond with a complication of the visible. And it's the camouflage technique. And so the things don't match their images. And what I find really specific and interesting is how you use the codes of contemporary art as a trap. And so it's like the walls of the white cube is really the white cube walls, the hard kitchen, the critical jargon, camouflage, the student experiments, or the painting in the administrative person desk is actually like hiding the real timetable. So I was wondering if it's some kind of belief from you that at a time where art has become kind of matrix of capitalism, you see invisibility as the primary condition or some kind of essential condition for the exercise of art.
I think it's a super interesting question. I think I must have thought about it more unconsciously. But of course, I mean, you're right. There is also this very strong position taken in the film about how to work when you're an art student, because they all the time talk about privacy and about being alone in their studios, not being able to be seen, because the problem of this architecture is, of course, that you're seen always and you start to perform the behavior of an art student rather than actually just working in your studio. And there is also this professor, this guy with a beard, explaining about his course and talking about the scratches of the record and the record player. And he's saying something like, in this little mess, or in this little imperfection somehow lies the spiritual. He has this idea that the spiritual somehow is incorporated in what is not perfect. So there is this idea throughout the film, I think, that both the invisible is important as well as the irregular or the messy or the hidden or the non-transparent. I think actually I guess in the film, the transparent and the digital is somehow the enemy, or that's the bad, the dark force somehow. And that might seem very nostalgic, but I just feel that there is something very alienating in this visibility that you're talking about. That when you cannot escape being visible, something is disrupted, I think, in most people, that somehow they externalize everything and things become really hard. So I guess that even I think your observations are super interesting, and of course especially this observation of hiding things within the conventions of contemporary art, and especially maybe this kitchen inside the wall. What do you think? Do you think there is something there?
I mean, that's what I thought was very, very interesting, because I feel like it's the purpose of this architecture is actually to produce like an image. It's really image orientated, and to frame students and to force them into some kind of like acting as artists. And that's where all the goal is, I guess, about this architecture too, you know, to provide to everyone some kind of image, and also return of investment of money and all that, you know, like show finally, you know, where is the money going, you know. And so all the fact that the resistance is actually organized on this code is I find very, very strong, because it's actually a real it's the camouflage idea. So art is really it's the camouflage for the real action going on, who will be secret, and it's really manifest in the white walls. It's really manifest also in the painting, like, you know, you have like it's hiding, but it's also like giving a very specific and contingent image of what art is. It's really like the codes, like the art is not just white cube, and you know, it's so it's really playing with the restriction also of this capitalism imagination towards art, of image of art, that I find really, really interesting. And for me it was also linking to the hiding position of the woman in Untitled. And I was thinking that there is a tension anyway, that it was not the first time that in your work there is this position of being seen and not being seen, or, you know, is the work that is not seen still work, and all this tension and the need of the artist to actually be able to be in his sphere, in his place for work. So
it's interesting. It's a good observation. I mean, I think we have somehow entered into a regime of complete visibility or visuality, and you know, even this panoptic idea around this building, that somehow everyone is watching everyone all the time. Yeah, I guess there is, to a certain degree, it's actually a subversive act somehow to hide in these surroundings. And before starting the work of the film, I was interviewing students who had experienced their teaching or this place as their learning environment, and one of them said that she actually constructed a kind of paper box, because then she could go inside that box and and be alone and be hidden somehow inside that box. I think it was interesting. So yeah, but it's also it's good what you're pointing out about the title Manifest, because it's we have the same in Scandinavian, that it means these two things. So yeah.
And so with this idea of the camouflage and like this technique, I had this feeling that this cover up is no stranger to your practice itself. And some of the film that I saw of you set a kind of trap on me. And I had the feeling that they use the code of the documentary to camouflage some kind of fictional writing that is constructing them. And in the case of Manifesto, I was wondering if what seemed to me like a documentary illusion is a strategy for working the image of reality of this school and of this building through fiction. And in this also context of resistance, I was wondering if fiction is for you some kind of weapon, to use the criminal language that you're referring to in the end, to bridge the impasse that we were evoking in the first place of this capitalist context.
I mean, it must be so that somehow I feel that fiction is a kind of, or semi-fiction. I mean, I guess most people understand that it's not a documentary. But of course, I mean, you can write things in fiction. You can invent things that don't really exist, and when you act as if it exists, there is something very strong happening. I think, even if everyone knows that it's not really true, I think my idea is that they can somehow still relate to it as if it was true, and maybe feel that there is some kind of realization or some kind of revolutionary feel that is stronger when you actually for some seconds only believe that this actually happened. So maybe there is something there that that I think most people start out watching the film and thinking it's a kind of documentary, which it also is actually in the start, because the first person speaking, I mean, the student, is actually just speaking about her own experience. So that's completely documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I have this idea that even if people realize after a while that, okay, this cannot really be real, I still think they can carry with them some kind of realization or some kind of idea that this could have maybe happened somehow.
Totally. Because it had happened.
So I guess that's, yeah. And I think, and also, I mean, I think this happens more or less all the time. I mean, we don't follow all rules and restrictions. We always go around and we navigate in them and we change them and we try to go under the radar somehow. And I think most people who are employed somewhere, they also use the copy machine for their own needs, or they, you know, they call from their office, or they do things. I mean, we all do things that are more, you know, criminal somehow in these situations and within these structures.
But I know that maybe because it was not the first film, but when I saw other film of you, I was really sure that I was really, like, especially Entitled, I was really sure that I was actually, you know, listening to someone real, you know, and like, it was
but
a real
you know,
interview.
that's the only film where I haven't really told if it's true or not. So that might be true, actually.
Okay, well, not so sure. The little sentence in the end was pretty. Anyway, okay. So my other question, is watching some of your film, of your previous film, I had the feeling sometimes you're linking or you are lying some kind of figures or some kind of situation of history or late, but very kind of deep and not really explicit or in tiny mode. Like in Entitled, I was thinking of Charlotte Posenenska. In Time Passes, you have this little allusion to Lilo Tano's work. And here in Manifesto, like the choice of the typed allure and of the manifest that appear on the screen evokes the 20th century avant-garde and different stories of activism. So I was wondering how, in your work in general and how in Manifesto in particular, if there is specific, if you had specific reference in mind belonging to art history, but not only art history, just history.
I mean, you're right. And I think these figures follow me somehow through my work, especially maybe the ones that somehow withdrew or had this kind of subversive reaction to their systems, you know, like Lilo Zano dropped out, and the same did Charlotte Posenenska, actually. So they are both very crucial references, I guess. And even, you know, Basian Ade from Time Passes. And I think in this film that it's more the general feeling of all the different alternative art schools that somehow have been at work during the 20th century. And they were always temporary. You know, they didn't last, but there were a lot of them. And so I feel that maybe at least the allusion to the manifesto as some kind of text that you actually relate to, you know, that someone writes a manifesto and then you have that as a kind of guideline somehow. I think that was important as a kind of reference to that tradition. It's not very important for the film. I mean, the film could have done also without this whole manifesto set up with the Courier font and, you know, the typewriter and all of this. But I think for me it alludes to fluxus and to different radical strategies, especially from last century. And I think maybe I'm mostly interested in all these initiatives that were student run, you know, that where students actually somehow took over the school or started their own education somehow, teach each other and teach themselves. I think that's a strong inspiration for the film. And I also feel that some of their ideals, for example, the idea that the school should be for everyone, everyone should be an art student. And they try to do that by making this wool workshop that everyone can attend. These ideals are, of course, also taken from various art historian references, for example, Joseph Beuys, of course. So I feel that they at least refer back in history to different initiatives that they know about. Yeah, it says 5 more minutes here. Okay,
maybe we have a bit more. So during one of the dialogue between the two students, they suddenly leave the language, their language, to speak in a more foreign language, which is not translated. And there's another sequence in the film where there is the two teachers, and there is a switch between Swedish to English to Spanish. There is a kind of mishmash of languages there. So I was wondering how this game with alternative language and no translation is working for you.
Yeah. I think that, the main issue of the film, I guess, is control and how they try to escape control. That's why they are not digital, for example, because now I, as a teacher, can actually control my own students through this kind of digital learning platform that they have. I can see, for example, if they have entered our learning room, or what it's called, and I can see if they picked out texts and how much time they spent with their texts, etc. You could actually survey or control your own students in very sophisticated ways. So I feel that a lot of what they're doing is to avoid this control, and I guess also that's why they have their own language. So they have constructed their own language that they speak, and that is also written actually in they have their own letters, which you can see on this kind of their alternative timetable. So I think for me that it was mostly a way to stage even further how they are able to construct their own systems that somehow can escape this control regime. And actually, with the language, I was specifically thinking about this film by Goran, that Poto and Cabengo from the 70s, about these two twins.
The two twins.
And how they speak, and they are the only one who can understand it in a way. And I think also Goran made that with a very clear thought around how revolutionary it is to be able to escape your parents' control or your superiors' control. So I think that was why I wanted that to be, but also, of course, to just make sure that it's an international school, that they speak English and they speak Spanish and different Scandinavian languages. Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know if I have some time more. I have just two little ones. The only artists that we see at work in the films are musicians. That we see in full frame, because some other we glimpse from more like the panopticon. And so the first one is the harpist, and her work is kind of like nearly shaking the glass. Hjort, of course, is not shaking it, but there is something there. There's a potential in the feeling of the sound that is actually can work with the glass, towards the glass. And the second one is actually summoning a community around her. And I was wondering, like, as these two artists are working more like with immaterial production, how is it playing with the idea of art?
I mean, to me, when I think about art, it's actually all different kinds of arts. So I feel that she's in an art school, even if she plays instruments, and she makes her instruments herself. I mean, it's the same person in the two scenes. It's just that she has different homemade instruments. But maybe that also contributes to this idea of the invisible or immaterial, that somehow, as the problem of being an art student in this interior is, of course, that once you make a huge sculpture, you contribute somehow to the idea of this visual regime, or the fanciful way of looking at an artist at work. So somehow it becomes almost a bit obedient, you know, to go on and produce. So maybe I was actually interested in the practice of immateriality, or the music, as something more subversive in this context than, you know, just showing someone who paints. Or it's harder somehow, I think, to make that into a subversive act in this film, because I put up all these the architectural constraints somehow, and this whole visual idea of control, so and the whole idea of the performing art student. So I think that was why I just ended up with this musician. But I guess also the people who sit with the wool are making art, actually. They're just like doing everything with this wool. So yeah, she's not the only one.
No, it's true. But she's also enabling all, like, it's around her that all the crowd is actually coming up. She's also helping for the formation of that crowd. And it feels like at that point, the fact that there is no walls and stuff has a different meaning. It's like subvert the meaning, the initial meaning of like this total visibility. Now it comes into kind of a reverse, because it's a possibility of sound, like making a whole of the space, but in a totally kind of like opposed manner.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And also they sit in this open space in the end, and the music somehow is able to float around. But then we see them again from the window in the last scene, which is very sad, of course. But but that's an interesting observation.
And then it was the last question, maybe just because I'm not familiar with Scandinavia, I just wonder if the puppets are actually representing specific characters or not specific characters.
Not really. I mean, they look a bit like trolls, which are like this kind of folklore figure of Norwegian mythology and Norwegian fairy tales. But I think in my initial idea was only that they were something completely absurd that was having their own performance going on, which is a different performance from this idea of the performing obedient art student. And they're consequently doing these things that are correct in the environment somehow. So for example, they're sitting in this auditorium waiting for something to happen, and they drink coffee very politely in the cafe, etc. So they're staging the kind of obedient participant in the system, but with these crazy masks that makes it a bit weird. I think that was the idea around them. But a lot of this is also just made without really knowing what they mean or why they're there. And for a long time I planned to not have them, but then I liked them. So now I think they're very sad and very nice in a way in the end.
Yeah, it's true. Okay.